My life with Mark had always felt like a carefully orchestrated ballet, graceful, poised, and predictable. We were the couple everyone envied, with our quaint house in the suburbs, my blossoming career as a graphic designer, and Mark's steady job at a prestigious law firm. We had everything anyone could ask for, or so I thought. The trouble began with the subtle changes. At first, they were barely noticeable. Mark's phone buzzing with an odd frequency, his frequent late nights at the office, and his growing irritation when I asked about his day. I brushed them off as the normal strains of adult life, but a nagging voice in my head began to grow louder. One evening, I decided to confront him. "Mark, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my tone steady as we sat across from each other at the dinner table. "About what, Emily?" His gaze was focused on his plate, avoiding eye contact. "I've noticed you've been distant lately. What's going on?" He set down his fork with deliberate calmness. "It's just work. You know how demanding it can be." I wanted to believe him, I really did. But as weeks turned into months, the distance between us became a chasm. The tipping point came when I stumbled upon Olivia's messages, texts that were no longer just the occasional, "Hey, can you review this?" but intimate and affectionate exchanges. My heart pounded as I read through them. Olivia was a junior associate at Mark's firm, and the messages were a clear sign of something far beyond professional courtesy. My fingers trembled as I dialed Mark's number, my stomach twisting in knots. "Emily, what's wrong?" His voice was a mix of concern and annoyance. "I found the messages, Mark. I saw what you and Olivia have been talking about." There was a long pause on the other end. "Emily, don't," I interrupted, my voice breaking. "I don't want to hear excuses. I need to know why." He sighed heavily. "I didn't want to hurt you. It just happened." My world seemed to collapse in that moment. The betrayal was suffocating, each breath more labored than the last. Mark's admission was the first blow, but the follow-up was even worse. Olivia's texts were not just a betrayal. They were an invasion of everything I thought I knew about my life and my marriage. The days that followed were a blur of pain and disbelief. I threw myself into work, hoping to distract myself from the gnawing emptiness inside. But every moment was a reminder of what I had lost. One day, as I was going through some old emails, I received a notification that made my blood run cold. A wedding invitation from Mark and Olivia. The date was set for a few months from now. I stared at the glossy card in my hand, unable to process the reality of it. How could they? The nerve of it. I felt like my entire world was spinning out of control. The once perfect image of our life had been shattered into a million pieces, and the jagged edges were cutting through everything I had once believed in. It was during this period of disarray that Olivia's messages started to arrive. Each one was an attempt at damage control, a desperate plea for forgiveness. The first one was apologetic and remorseful. "I'm so sorry, Emily. I never meant for things to end like this." The next few were more insistent, almost pleading. "Please, we need to talk. I want to explain everything." But I couldn't bring myself to respond. What could she possibly say that would make me feel better? The trust was gone. The foundation of my marriage had been cracked beyond repair. I felt like I was drowning in a sea of unanswered questions and unspoken pain. In the midst of this chaos, Mark tried to reach out, but his calls went unanswered. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, to face the man who had once been my everything but was now the embodiment of my deepest hurt. He left messages apologizing and asking for a chance to talk, but I was too broken to respond. One evening, as I sat in the dim light of our living room, trying to make sense of it all, Sarah, my closest friend, came over. She found me curled up on the couch, my eyes red from crying. "Emily," she said softly, her voice filled with concern. "You don't have to go through this alone." I looked at her, feeling both comforted and overwhelmed. "I don't even know what to do, Sarah. Everything feels like a lie." She sat down beside me, her presence a soothing balm. "You'll find a way through this. We'll figure it out together, but first, let's just get you through today." Her words were a small anchor in the storm of my emotions. As the days went by, I began to see that while my world had been shattered, I wasn't completely lost. The support from friends and family, though invaluable, couldn't replace the sense of security and love that had been torn away. But it was a start. The path ahead was uncertain, but I knew that somehow I had to find my way through the wreckage of what had been my life with Mark. The days after the revelation felt like a relentless march through a fog of despair. The initial shock of Mark's betrayal had given way to a deeper, more insidious form of pain, a sense of dislocation and numbness that made everything feel foreign. I moved through the motions of daily life, but I was detached, as if I were watching my life unfold from a distance. Returning to my parents' home was like stepping back into a cocoon, a place where the harsh edges of reality could be softened by the familiar comforts of childhood. The house smelled like my mother's lavender soap, and the creaky floorboards beneath my feet were a reminder of simpler times. My parents tried their best to make me feel at home, but their efforts were tinged with an awkwardness that only added to my sense of isolation. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table picking at a plate of comfort food, mashed potatoes and roast chicken, my mother hovered nearby, her concern palpable. "Emily dear, do you think you should see a counselor or therapist?" she asked gently, her eyes full of worry. I looked up from my plate, trying to muster a smile. "I don't know, Mom, maybe. I just feel like everything's spinning out of control, and I don't know how to get a handle on it." She nodded, her face a mask of helplessness. "We just want you to be okay, honey. We want to support you however we can." My father, usually more reserved, chimed in with a rare display of emotion. "If there's anything we can do to help, just let us know. We're here for you." Their support was genuine, but it was not a cure for the emotional void I was experiencing. I often found myself withdrawing into my old room, where the familiar posters and stuffed animals seemed to mock my current state of disarray. The sanctuary of my childhood was now a bittersweet reminder of a life that felt both comforting and confining. My friend Sarah was a constant presence, always willing to listen and offer a comforting word. She came over nearly every day, sometimes bringing coffee, sometimes just her company. One afternoon, she found me lying on my bed, staring blankly at the ceiling. "You're still in bed?" she asked, her tone a mix of concern and gentle reproach. "I don't have the energy to do anything else," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. Sarah sat down beside me, her hand resting lightly on my arm. "I get it. But you need to start taking small steps. It's okay to feel how you're feeling, but you can't stay like this forever." "I know," I said, sitting up. "But every step feels like a mountain." "Well," she said with a hint of a grin, "we'll tackle the mountain one pebble at a time." Her words, though simple, were a balm to my weary soul. Slowly, I began to take those pebbles and place them along a path to recovery. The first step was dealing with the practical matters that had been put on hold: divorce proceedings, dividing assets, and the emotional mess that came with untangling my life from Mark's. Meeting with a lawyer was a sobering experience. The office was sleek and impersonal, a stark contrast to the warmth of my parents' home. The lawyer, a sharp-dressed man named Richard, reviewed the details of my case with a professional detachment that felt both reassuring and alien. "So Emily," he said, flipping through a stack of papers, "the primary issues we need to address are the division of property and spousal support. Do you have any specific concerns?" I took a deep breath, trying to keep my voice steady. "I just want to make sure everything is fair. I don't want to be left with nothing." Richard nodded. "Understandable. We'll work to ensure that your interests are protected." The legal jargon and formalities were overwhelming, but Richard's professionalism provided a sense of structure amidst the chaos. However, the emotional weight of the proceedings was something I couldn't escape. Every document signed, every decision made felt like another step toward finality. A finality that was both liberating and terrifying. Amidst all this, I faced a personal health scare that seemed almost poetic in its cruelty. I'd been feeling unwell for weeks, chalking it up to stress and fatigue. But when I collapsed one morning while getting ready for an appointment, my parents insisted on taking me to the hospital. The tests revealed that I had a severe vitamin deficiency and dehydration, likely exacerbated by the emotional strain I'd been under. As I lay in the hospital bed, hooked up to an IV, I had a rare moment of quiet reflection. My body had betrayed me in the midst of my emotional turmoil, reminding me that I couldn't ignore my own well-being in the face of everything else. The nurses and doctors were kind, and the care I received was a small comfort in the midst of the larger storm of my life. During my recovery, I began to find a rhythm in the chaos. The routines of daily life at my parents' house, combined with the gradual progress in my legal and emotional journey, began to form a semblance of normalcy. Sarah continued to be my rock, offering practical help and emotional support in equal measure. One day, as we sat in the garden, Sarah turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "You know, Emily, you're stronger than you give yourself credit for." I looked at her, my eyes tired but grateful. "It doesn't always feel that way." "It's okay to not feel strong all the time," she said gently. "Strength isn't about never breaking down. It's about getting back up when you do." Her words were a small beacon of hope, a reminder that even in the midst of overwhelming pain, there was room for healing and growth. The journey ahead was still daunting, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of resilience within me, a faint but steady light guiding me through the shadows of my past and into the uncertain future. The wedding invitation arrived like a final, cruel twist of the knife. It was glossy and adorned with elegant calligraphy, the kind that had once been a symbol of joy, but now seemed like a mocking reminder of everything that had gone wrong. The card was addressed to me, Emily Harrington, and beneath the traditional names was the date, just a few weeks away. The reality of Mark and Olivia's impending nuptials was sinking in, and I was left grappling with a swirl of emotions. I stared at the invitation, feeling the weight of its significance press down on me. The idea of attending the wedding was both repellent and intriguing. It felt like a chance to reclaim some control over the narrative of my life, to face my betrayers head-on and perhaps even to gain a semblance of closure. But the thought of seeing Mark and Olivia together, celebrating what they had built at my expense, made my stomach churn. I decided to discuss it with Sarah. As always, she was a pillar of support, her pragmatic approach balancing the whirlwind of my thoughts. We met at a local cafe, the kind with overstuffed chairs and strong coffee that seemed to have a knack for steadying frayed nerves. As Sarah took a sip of her latte, she looked at me with a mixture of concern and curiosity. "So have you made a decision about the wedding?" I pushed the invitation across the table toward her. "I don't know if I should go. Part of me wants to see it for myself, to get closure. But another part of me is terrified of what it will feel like." Sarah examined the card, her brow furrowing. "It's understandable to be conflicted. But you have to think about what's best for you. If going to the wedding feels like it would help you move forward, then maybe it's worth considering." "I'm worried about how my parents will react," I confessed. "They've been so supportive, but they don't know the full extent of what's been happening." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. "You should talk to them. They might surprise you with their understanding." That evening, I broached the subject with my parents. They were seated in the living room, my mother knitting and my father reading the newspaper. The room was warm and comforting, a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. "Mom, Dad," I began, my voice steady but laced with apprehension. "I've received an invitation to Mark and Olivia's wedding." My mother's hands paused mid-knit and my father lowered the newspaper, both of them turning their full attention to me. "Do you plan on going?" my father asked, his voice tinged with concern. "I'm not sure," I admitted. "Part of me wants to go, to see it all for myself and get some closure. But I'm also afraid of how it will affect me." My mother set her knitting aside and looked at me with a sympathetic expression. "Emily, you need to do what feels right for you. We support you, whatever you decide. Just promise me that you'll take care of yourself." My father added, "We trust you to make the best decision for your well-being." If you think attending the wedding will help you find closure, then you should consider it. Their support was a balm to my frayed nerves, and it gave me the resolve to follow through with my decision. With a mixture of dread and determination, I began preparing for the wedding. The thought of confronting Mark and Olivia in such a public and celebratory setting was daunting, but I knew it was a necessary step for my emotional recovery. Sarah played an integral role in my preparations. We spent hours shopping for an outfit that would convey a sense of dignity and resolve. I settled on a simple, elegant dress, a classic black that would be respectful but unmistakably assertive. Sarah accompanied me to the final fitting, offering her usual blend of honest feedback and encouragement. "You look fantastic," she said as I twirled in front of the mirror. "This is your statement. You're walking into that wedding not as a victim but as someone who's moving forward." Her words were a source of strength, and I clung to them as the wedding day approached. The day itself was a whirlwind of emotions. I arrived at the venue, a lavish estate with manicured gardens and grandiose decor that seemed almost theatrical in its opulence. The scene was set for a fairy tale celebration, but for me, it was an arena of personal confrontation. The ceremony was underway when I arrived, and I took a deep breath before stepping into the grand hall. I could see Mark and Olivia at the altar, their smiles bright and their joy palpable. The sight of them together was a sharp, painful reminder of the betrayal I had endured. I found a seat at the back of the room, trying to remain inconspicuous, but also determined to witness the moment that had been so devastating for me. As I watched, I felt a mixture of anger and sadness, but also a strange sense of clarity. Seeing them together in their moment of happiness was a final, undeniable statement of what they had chosen over what I had lost. It solidified the reality of their relationship and allowed me to accept it as part of my past, rather than something that would continue to haunt me. During the reception, I avoided direct interactions with Mark and Olivia. The energy of the event, while initially overwhelming, eventually became a backdrop to my own introspective journey. Conversations with other guests were polite but distant, as if everyone was aware of the unspoken tension in the air. As I prepared to leave, Sarah found me and offered a comforting hug. "How are you holding up?" she asked softly. "It's been hard, but I think I needed to see it all for myself," I replied, my voice steady but reflective. "It's like I'm finally closing a chapter, even if it's one I didn't want to read." Sarah nodded, her presence a steadying force. "I'm proud of you for coming. You faced it head-on, and now you can take the next step forward." The drive back to my parents' house was quiet, the night air cool and refreshing. The wedding, with all its splendor and pain, had been a significant step in my journey. It wasn't the end, but it felt like a crucial turning point. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of hope, a sense that I was moving towards something new and meaningful. The wedding day had arrived, and I braced myself for the spectacle that was Mark and Olivia's celebration. The venue was nothing short of a grand affair, a sprawling estate with an opulent garden and a grand ballroom that glittered with chandeliers. The decor was a riot of colors and luxury, an extravagant contrast to the turmoil I felt inside. Each step I took toward the entrance felt heavier, as though the weight of the past months was pressing down on me. As I walked through the doors, the grandeur of the venue struck me with a mix of awe and disdain. The air was thick with the scent of fresh flowers and the hum of chattering guests. I took a deep breath and reminded myself of why I was here. Not for the joy of the occasion, but for a sense of closure. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on Mark and Olivia at the front. They were the picture of happiness, their faces lit with smiles that seemed to mock the chaos they had caused. The ceremony was a blur of pomp and ceremony. I tried to focus on the vows being exchanged, but my mind was a swirl of emotions. The sight of Olivia in her elegant white dress, walking down the aisle with a grace that seemed almost saccharine, was particularly hard to bear. My heart ached with every step she took. I had once imagined my life intertwined with Mark's, but now it was clear that their future was one I would never be a part of. As the ceremony concluded, I made my way to the reception area, where the atmosphere was vibrant with music and laughter. I tried to blend into the background, but it was impossible to ignore the sense of unease that clung to me. I could see the occasional glance in my direction, but most guests seemed to be absorbed in their own conversations and festivities. Just as I was beginning to feel like an outsider, I noticed a familiar face, Mark's mother, Elaine. She approached me with a hesitant smile, her demeanor a stark contrast to the polished elegance of the event. "Emily, it's so good to see you," she said, her voice soft with an undercurrent of awkwardness. "Elaine," I greeted her, managing a polite smile despite the tumult of emotions inside me. "Thank you for having me." "I wasn't sure if you would come," she admitted. "I hope you're doing okay." I looked at her, seeing the concern in her eyes. Despite everything, there was a part of me that still cared for her deeply. "It's been a rough time," I said honestly. "But I'm here now." Elaine sighed, her gaze shifting to where Mark and Olivia were mingling with their guests. "I wish things had been different. You and Mark were always so perfect." "Not anymore," I said, my voice barely more than a whisper. "But thank you for your concern." The conversation felt like a small but significant moment of validation in the midst of the chaos. Elaine's presence, while a reminder of the life I once had, also underscored the reality of its end. The reception itself was a dizzying mix of splendor and superficiality. The guests seemed more concerned with their own enjoyment than with the emotional undercurrents of the day. The clinking of glasses and the strains of the orchestra were a constant backdrop, a reminder of the celebration that was unfolding while I was still grappling with the fallout of the past. As the evening progressed, I found myself alone at the edge of the dance floor, watching the couples twirl and sway. I felt like a spectator in my own life, disconnected from the scene around me. It was then that I overheard a conversation that caught my attention. "Did you hear about Olivia's past?" a woman whispered to her companion. "Apparently, she's had quite a few adventures before Mark." The companion replied, "I'm not surprised. Mark always seemed to have a taste for the dramatic." Their words were like a punch to the gut. The realization that Mark had not only betrayed me but had chosen someone with a tumultuous past was both infuriating and validating. It seemed that the story I had been forced to leave behind was filled with more layers than I had initially realized. I excused myself and went outside to catch my breath. The cool night air was a welcome relief from the opulence of the ballroom. As I stood alone on the terrace, the moonlight casting long shadows, I tried to gather my thoughts. My heart was heavy, but I also felt a flicker of something else, determination. This wedding, with all its spectacle and pretense, was a final marker of the end of a chapter. It was time to turn the page and begin a new one. Just then, Sarah joined me, her presence a comforting anchor amidst the emotional storm. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes filled with genuine concern. "I'm surviving," I said with a shaky smile. "It's been intense." Sarah looked out at the horizon, her gaze thoughtful. "You've done something incredibly brave by coming here. You faced it all head-on, and that's something to be proud of." I nodded, appreciating her words more than I could express. "Thank you. I'm just trying to find my way through all of this." She placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "You will. This is just one step on the journey, and you've made it through with more strength than you realize." The night wore on, and the wedding began to wind down. As I prepared to leave, I felt a strange mixture of relief and sadness. The event had been a final confrontation with the remnants of my past, but it had also been a step toward closure. I had faced Mark and Olivia, witnessed their new beginning, and come out on the other side, bruised but not broken. The drive home was a quiet one, my thoughts a jumble of reflections and emotions. The wedding had been a dramatic end to a chapter, but it was also the beginning of a new journey. The path ahead was uncertain, but I felt a newfound sense of resolve. I was ready to face whatever came next, armed with the knowledge that I had faced my past with courage and dignity. The final legal documents had been signed, and the alimony settlement was officially settled. The culmination of months of back-and-forth negotiations and legal battles felt like an anticlimax. I had fought for my rights, but the victory was bittersweet. As I signed the last form, I felt a mix of relief and emptiness. It was a final formal acknowledgement of the end of my marriage, a piece of paper that would forever define the division of our past life. Returning to my apartment, I found solace in the mundane routines that had started to rebuild my life. The small victories, organizing my bookshelves, redecorating my living space, felt like incremental steps toward reclaiming my identity. It was in these moments of quiet normalcy that I started to truly understand the magnitude of what had happened and the strength it took to move forward. One evening, while I was absorbed in a new project at work, Sarah stopped by unannounced. She brought with her a sense of cheerfulness that contrasted sharply with the somber weight of my recent experiences. "Look at you," she said, stepping into my apartment and taking in the fresh paint and rearranged furniture. "It's like walking into a brand new home." "It feels like a fresh start," I replied, brushing a stray paintbrush bristle from my hand. "It's strange how small changes can feel so significant." Sarah set down a box of takeout on the kitchen counter. "I figured you might need some company and a distraction from all the legal paperwork. How about we have a celebratory dinner?" We sat at the kitchen table, eating takeout and reminiscing about our lives before all the drama. Between bites, Sarah asked, "How are you really doing now that everything is settled?" I paused, considering her question. "I think I'm doing better. The divorce was hard, but having it legally finalized has brought a sense of closure. It's like a door has finally closed and I'm free to move on." "Good," Sarah said, her eyes reflecting genuine warmth. "You deserve to be happy and to find yourself again. You've been through so much." Our conversation turned to lighter topics, and for a while, I allowed myself to forget the pain of the past. Sarah's presence was a reminder of the supportive friends I had, people who had stood by me through the darkest times. Their unwavering support had been a lifeline. In the weeks following the legal settlement, I began focusing on my career. My professional life had always been a source of pride and satisfaction, but now it took on a new significance. I threw myself into my work with renewed vigor, channeling my energy into projects that challenged me and allowed me to grow. It was a different kind of therapy, a way to build something new and positive out of the rubble of my past. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my former boss, who offered me a significant promotion. It was an opportunity I had once dreamed of but had set aside in the midst of my personal turmoil. The offer felt like a symbol of the new chapter in my life, a reward for all the hard work and resilience I had shown. When I shared the news with Sarah, she squealed with delight. "That's incredible. I'm so proud of you. It's like everything is finally falling into place." "I can't believe it's happening," I said, feeling a mixture of excitement and disbelief. "It's exactly what I needed, something to look forward to, a new challenge." As I prepared for the next phase of my career, I also began exploring new interests and hobbies. I enrolled in a cooking class and started attending art workshops, both of which became outlets for creativity and self-expression. It was liberating to discover new facets of myself, to embrace activities that brought me joy and fulfillment. One evening, after a particularly enjoyable art class, I ran into Elaine at a local gallery. Her presence was unexpected but not unwelcome. We exchanged polite greetings, and I could see the genuine regret in her eyes. "Emily," she said softly, "I wanted to apologize for how things ended. I know it was difficult, and I'm truly sorry for all the pain you went through." I looked at her, feeling a sense of closure that had been elusive for so long. "Thank you, Elaine. It means a lot to hear you say that. I've come to realize that moving on is the best thing for me." Elaine nodded, a look of relief crossing her face. "I'm glad to hear that. I hope you're finding happiness and peace." "I am," I replied, smiling warmly. "It's been a journey, but I'm getting there." As the days turned into weeks, the healing process continued. Each new experience, whether it was a professional achievement or a personal discovery, added a new layer to my sense of self. I had learned to embrace the uncertainty of the future with a newfound confidence, understanding that my past did not define me. The legal battles, the emotional upheavals, and the betrayals had all been part of a journey that led me to a place of self-discovery and empowerment. I was no longer the woman defined by her past mistakes, but someone who had grown from them. Looking back, I realized that the journey had not been just about reclaiming my life from the wreckage of my marriage, but also about finding the strength to embrace the future with open arms. Each step, each challenge, had been a building block in creating a life that was authentically mine. And as I faced the future, I did so with a sense of optimism and resilience that I had never known before. The path ahead was still uncertain, but I was ready to walk it with the knowledge that I had the strength and the support to face whatever came next.